I always thought I had a family. Not a perfect one, not the one they show in expensive brand ads, but a real one. The one where parents love their children equally, support them in their struggle for a place in the sun, and never sacrifice one for the sake of the other. I grew up in a world where everything was already decided for me. Our family business worked for decades, turning our family from ordinary entrepreneurs into real market players. We weren't millionaires, but our status was high enough to live without worries. I saw my future in this business. Since I was a little kid, I listened to my father talk about deals, investors, and the economy. He liked to say that a family is a company where everyone has a role. I believed in it. I was never a favorite, but I never felt superfluous either. At least that's how it seemed to me. My father did not praise me, but he did not criticize me either. My mother was caring but did not show much tenderness. My brother was the center of their world, although I didn't notice it for a long time. I was never told that I was not good enough. But I was never told that I was good enough. It was a quiet indifference that kills more slowly than outright cruelty. I worked alongside my father and brother, studied, and got my bumps in the road. I was no genius, but I knew the business as well as my brother. And yet, when it came time to make a decision, I was simply crossed out. It was just an ordinary family dinner. At the time, no one suspected that it would be my last. I came home as usual, with no premonition of a storm. But when my mother accidentally mentioned that my brother had managed to enter a prestigious university abroad, I was surprised. It was too expensive even for us. I looked at my father, and he just shrugged his shoulders as he always did when he didn't want to explain the obvious. I didn't understand right away. Maybe I didn't want to understand. But when my mother's words finally formed a sentence in my head, I could hardly breathe. My part of the business was sold. Without my knowledge. Without warning. Sold to pay for my brother's education. I looked at them and did not recognize them. They spoke calmly, even with a bit of irritation, as if I was exaggerating the problem. It was just business, they said. It was just money. My brother needed this opportunity, and I can handle it. I always find a way out. I'm strong. Strong? No. Just superfluous. Suddenly, my whole story started to form a single picture. All these years I had been a background figure, a person who was convenient to lean on when needed, but not someone who had the right to get something. I saw how my father spoke proudly about his brother, how he spoke about him with hope. I thought it was normal. But now I knew the truth. I was never his equal. It was not an accident. Not a temporary injustice. They had made a choice. I sat at the table, hearing their voices, which were already becoming distant. They didn't try to justify themselves because they didn't even consider it something that needed justification. For them, everything was logical, investing in a promising person. And in their opinion, it wasn't me. They didn't care that I had lost everything I had strived for. They didn't care that they made this decision without me. They didn't care how I felt at that moment. They thought that I would accept it, as I always accepted all their decisions because it was the way things were done. But this time I didn't. I was no longer a child who nodded obediently in response to my parents' instructions. I was no longer a son who was ready to wait his turn. There would be no turn. It had never existed. The next morning I packed my things. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I didn't demand explanations. I just walked out the door knowing that I would not return. I didn't know where I was going. I had no plan. Only an emptiness in my chest and a bitter aftertaste of realization. Behind me was the family that gave me up without hesitation. Ahead was a life I hadn't planned. I didn't leave right away. After that dinner, after the cold shock of being written out, I stayed at home. Not because I hoped to change anything, I knew it was pointless. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to hear an explanation that would somehow justify them. But there were no excuses. My father was as calm as ever. For him, it was just a decision, one of those that he made every day in business, weighing risks and opportunities. My brother needed an education, the business could not afford such expenses, and selling my share was logical. He didn't even understand why I was so affected by it. I could have done something myself, found another way. I had the character of a fighter, he said. As if character could replace the money that gave my brother a start in life. I tried to argue, but it was a conversation with the deaf. They did not see the problem. I was just confronted with the fact that it was not my life, not my future. I was superfluous in their plans, and they didn't even try to hide it. I had two options: accept it or leave. And I left. with the things that barely fit in my old backpack. Without money, the crumbs I had could not cover even a month of normal life. Without connections in the business world, I no longer had weight. I had nothing but anger and pain. The first months were hell. I didn't know what to do. The road that had once been smooth and clear before me suddenly came to an end. I lived in cheap rooms, ate whatever I had to, worked wherever I had to. Physical labor, low-paying part-time jobs, anything that gave me at least some money. I hated this life. I woke up and went to sleep with pain in my body and soul. I was 23 and I felt like an old man. I saw my former friends building careers, my brother living a luxurious student life abroad, and I rubbed the calluses on my hands, trying not to think about what I once had. The worst part was that they weren't even looking for me. My parents, my family. They didn't call. They didn't ask how I was. It was convenient for them to think that I was gone. I became for them what they always thought I was, a nobody. But somewhere deep inside, another feeling was burning. Anger. It became my fuel. I could not regain what I had lost, but I could build something else, something bigger. And I swore to myself that one day they would regret their decision. I would come back, but not as they knew me. I will come back as someone they will not be able to ignore. I didn't notice when I reached the bottom. It was so gradual that I didn't even realize how fast I was sinking. All those months of struggle, self-deception, trying to keep at least some semblance of stability, all of this led me to the brink. It must have happened at night, when I was sitting in the cold entrance of some abandoned building, hiding from the rain. I was shivering from the cold that penetrated my very soul. I had no money even for a cheap hostel. All possibilities disappeared from my life. The job I had during the day was over. They just didn't renew the contract because they found someone younger and more resilient. I was exhausted, hungry, and angry. But most of all, I was angry with myself. I could not understand where I had made a mistake. I was not a fool. I grew up in business. I knew how things worked. Why did I end up here? Why did I let them take away not only my opportunities but also my faith in myself? I felt so small, so helpless, that I didn't even have the strength to ask myself what went wrong. I looked at my hands covered with calluses, and realized that if I didn't do something right now, I would stay here forever. It was the moment when the realization came, not in the forehead, but deep in my heart, like an electric shock. I realized that I could no longer be the person they had made me. I cannot remain a prisoner of other people's decisions and assessments. I would no longer be a victim. That night I made a decision. It was a painful but necessary decision. I decided that I would get up and do everything I could to become the person I was meant to be. The next morning I found a job. Any kind of job. It didn't matter what it was: unloading goods, night shift at the warehouse, cleaning offices. I took everything. If there were several shifts in a row, I took them all. All my strength was spent on surviving and not breaking down. I worked as if I wanted to destroy myself. I would wake up, work, go to bed, and wake up again to continue. But it wasn't self-destruction. It was building. It was not just a process of survival. It was a rebirth that required patience and uncompromising commitment. I worked during the day and studied at night. Google, free courses, libraries. I gobbled up everything I could find. Business, finance, investments. I wrote down every idea, analyzed every step I could take. I knew I needed to do more than just work. I had to learn skills that would allow me to get out of this cycle of poverty. I wanted knowledge not just to feel better but to change my future. I didn't need their business anymore. I no longer needed to be a part of what they had built and destroyed at the same time. I would create my own. The first chance came a year later. I met a man who needed an assistant in a small startup. He didn't pay much, but he gave me knowledge. I worked there, as I have worked everywhere, to the limit of my abilities. I did more than what was required of me. I slept for 3 or 4 hours. No one noticed me then, but I saw my future clearly. Now I realized that this job was not just an opportunity. It was my start. And no matter how hard it was, I felt that this path was my salvation. They will look at me one day, and they will realize who they have lost. This moment when I not only pulled myself out of the muddy pit, but stood up on my own 2 feet and became the person I was supposed to be, was not just a triumph. It was my resurrection. I was no longer the man they had left behind. Now I was the one they might be looking for someday. I came back when it was time. The time when I stopped being that guy who got kicked out of his house. The guy who picked up the leftovers on the floor, who swallowed his raw tears in the cold shadows, watching his life fall apart. The one who looked at his empty pockets and dreamed of any possibility, any small hope, to escape from this swamp. Now I stood on my own 2 feet, and nothing could break me anymore. I no longer lived in rooms that smelled of dampness and decay, where light came through cracks in old blinds. I didn't count the kopecks to buy a piece of cheap bread and water. I built my life from scratch, step by step, day by day, without rest. And this time, when I finally got up, no one could take away what I had. It was my result, my effort, my struggle. I was no longer that guy who was looking for his place in the world. I had created it. I gathered everything I needed: experience, knowledge, skills. I learned to keep my head up even in the darkest moments. Now I was the kind of person who could not be forced to give up. At first, I opened a small construction company. Everyone laughed at my ambitions, at my unrivaled plans, but I saw the prospect, I saw the opportunity. Over time, the company began to make a profit. Then I created another one, and another one. I worked without fail. I gave all my energy to the business as if it were my only goal in life. I had no room for error. I put everything I had into it. I took risks at every step. It was not just a business, it was a game of survival. I expanded, bought competitors when they started to weaken. Those who could not withstand the competition became part of my strategic plan. And there was no one who could stop me from moving forward. My determination and cold calculation were becoming my best tools. My name was now a household name in business circles. I no longer needed to make an effort to attract attention. Now I was setting the rules of the game myself. I didn't need to explain why I had reached this level. Everyone already knew my story. Now I was the one to whom people turned for advice and help. And I built all this on my own without anyone's support. But when I was watching the market news, a familiar name appeared on the screen. It was my family's company. They used to own the whole market. They were steadfast. They had money, connections, influence. Their business was a symbol of stability that everyone looked up to. Everyone knew that if you worked for them, you had already earned your place in life. They ruled the market, but now everything was different. Debts, problems, internal conflicts. They were losing contracts, their reputation was slowly crumbling. I could just watch their downfall, sit on the sidelines and enjoy watching their majestic castle crumble under the onslaught of time. But I knew I couldn't afford that luxury. I wasn't just a bystander, I was a part of this story, and now I was deciding how it would end. I gathered information. I followed their movements closely, watched their failures. Creditors were putting pressure on my father. He could not find a way out of this situation. They tried to find investors several times, but no one wanted to invest in a company that was already sinking. My brother, on whom they had pinned all their hopes, turned out to be not such a talented manager. He had a degree but no survival instinct. He did not know what to do when the ship was sinking. I knew what to do. I was not going to miss the chance. I started buying up their debts. Quietly, without making too much noise. Through shell companies, through outsiders, I picked up everything they couldn't keep. Each of their failures brought me closer to my goal. I knew how to wait, I knew how to choose my time. And so, when they were on the verge of complete collapse, I made my last move. I became their only chance for salvation. And I invited them to a special meeting. They thought they were lucky. When a mysterious investor offered to pay off their debts and save the company, they didn't even ask why someone would take a risk for them. Desperation clouded their judgment. They signed the agreement without reading between the lines, not realizing that they were now working for me. I wanted them to take this step themselves. To give up the last control of what was once my legacy without hesitation. They agreed to the deal without even trying to find out who their savior was. I watched. I read their reports, listened to their meetings, analyzed their decisions. They did not change. They were still trying to avoid responsibility, to shift problems to others. They thought that everything would go up now. But they didn't know that I was the one who was keeping them on the hook. The meeting was scheduled for Friday night. A luxurious restaurant in the city center, a private room. The waiters already knew that they shouldn't approach until the order was given. It was to be the perfect place for the final blow. They arrived on time. My father looked exhausted. He had aged. His mother was holding his hand, nervously clutching her purse. The brother, perfectly pressed shirt, expensive suit, self-confidence. They sat down at the table, impatient to meet the man who had saved them. I gave them time. Let them feel important. Let them believe that they were about to meet the person who would put their lives back on track. And then the door opened. I walked in. My mother looked away sharply. My father froze. My brother frowned as if trying to understand what I was doing here. I sat down across from them and smiled. It was time to open the cards. They looked at me and I saw everything I wanted in their eyes. Disbelief. Fear. My brother was the first to come to. His eyes narrowed, his face tensed. He did not understand what was happening, but he already felt threatened. My father gritted his teeth. My mother clenched her fingers on her purse until her knuckles turned white. I remained silent. I let them be the first to break the silence. They couldn't understand. How did I end up here? Why am I sitting at this table? How did I know about this dinner? They could not even imagine the truth. I watched the tension wash over them. My father's eyes were darting around, looking for a way out, an explanation, an excuse. My brother's lips parted, but he never said a word. They thought they knew who I was. They thought I was the guy they could throw away, sell, forget. They thought I was still someone they could ignore. I calmly took the wine glass and took a sip. They were waiting for me to say something. I allowed myself only a short pause, a feeling of triumph mixed with sadness for all these lost opportunities. My gaze was full of determination and ruthlessness that people who lived in their own illusion of righteousness could never understand. An internal drama was unfolding that no words, no screams, no tears could stop. My silent judgment was obvious. Justice will always be served, and those who betray the most precious will pay the price. I knew that this evening would be a turning point for all of us. They were facing the one who had once been invisible, and now had returned to restore balance. The silence that enveloped the room was a reminder of the unexpected power of the past to destroy the present and the future. Every movement they made, every incomprehensible emotion, was a signal that they could no longer hide from the consequences of their actions. I simply handed them the envelope. My father took it with trembling fingers. He opened it. He ran his eyes over the documents. His face turned pale. He handed the papers to his mother. She looked at it and her lips trembled. My brother snatched the documents from her hands and read them quickly. His eyes were filled with horror. They understood. I am their new owner. I am the one who decides their fate. I watched this truth sink into their heads as despair filled the space between us. Their business is no longer theirs. They no longer control anything. They no longer have a choice. The tension has reached a peak. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. They had kept me in the dark for so long. And now they were the ones who were trapped.